This video is sponsored by Game Toppers. Turn your own kitchen or dining room table into a premium portable game solution at a fraction of the cost. Hey everybody, welcome to Drive Thru Review 755. Today we're going to talk about Warhammer Quest Lost Relics. So this is a new game that's coming out from Games Workshop. I believe it's only a Barnes & Noble exclusive right now. Although they've done that in the past. About every year they come out with 2 or 3 games that are like Barnes & Noble exclusives, and then eventually you can usually sometimes get them elsewhere, sometimes not. Sometimes this is your only opportunity. I know they have brought them out into other places like in Europe and other places, for example, not through Barnes & Noble. So you might have to do a little bit of research there if you don't have a Barnes & Noble you have access to. But what this is obviously it's a new game in the Warhammer Quest line. Now this plays 1 to 4 players. It's a self-contained game. It's not an expansion or anything for Cursed City or any of the other, Silver Tower, Shadows over Hammerhall or anything like that. It does have some things in common with those games. Let's just go down to the table before I spoil the review. So let's go down to the table, I'll show you how it works, and then I will come back up and I'll tell you what I think of it. Okay, I've got kind of things sort of set up as they might appear kind of midway through a game. I just kind of threw something together here. One thing you will notice, and I don't want to throw anybody off, is I do have some models here on the table here. And these are not models that come with the game. I'll explain it here in a second. Now the game does come with for the heroes, you'll be playing the Stormcast Eternals, so we'll pan over here. And these are the models that do come in the game. These are push fit models. You can see they kind of have a blue plastic there. And these are figures that you can get typically in other boxes and other sets for the Stormcast army in Age of Sigmar generally. I didn't use any glue on any of these except for this gal here, Calthea. Like I said, they're push fit. I did have to do a little bit of glue because there's like a line here, you can't really see it anymore, but where the front of her connects to the back of her and kind of like in the middle. You might be able to kind of see it there, but it's kind of gone away. This didn't really like push together that great, so I just did just a tiny drop of glue and squeezed that like that. So sometimes with these push fits, I sometimes wonder if the temperature of where you're at has to do with how the plastic has contracted or expanded and how easy it is. Everything else went together super easy, snapped right in, no glue at all, except just that one part of Calthea here of this model. So just keep that in mind. You will need clippers and stuff to clip them out of the sprues, but there's no glue involved, so if you're not a miniatures person, then you don't have to worry too much about it. Now, all of the monsters that you'll be fighting are represented by these tokens. So here you can see you have some different skeletons and some iron jaws and orcs here. These are some of the Ard boys and stuff like that. So, it's a little bit of a spoiler. I was having so much fun with the game, I was like, let me bling this out, because I have a ton of Age of Sigmar models. And I said, you know what? I was going to go grab some stuff from some of the armies because I have some of these armies myself. I said, I think these would be actually cool to grab some of the underworlds, the Warhammer underworlds, Shadespire, Night Vault, and all that stuff. And lo and behold, all of the bad guys in the game correspond to a particular warband in Warhammer Underworld. So here you can see this is like the Ard Boys models. These are all from Warhammer Underworld. There are 3 tokens here that are Ard Boys and 1 Ard Boy boss. So there are 3 Ard Boys in that set, and then there's also kind of a boss model here. You can see this one here with kind of the fur on it. So I said, oh, that's useful, that's handy. Well, come to find out, like all of these skeletons here that you can see, there's a total of 6 skeletons, and then there's 1 Death Rattle Warden. This is kind of like the boss model when that particular warband for Underworlds has that boss model as well. We've got here, I think this is called like the Lost 9 or something. It's a Tzeentchian warband, and so you can see all the tokens there kind of on the bottom, and then there's all the models there. So if you do want to bling it out, or if you have a bunch of Underworld stuff, this is kind of a no-brainer just to pick this up. You've got the Squigs there and some of the Grots, and then you have these Skaven ones here next to their, you can see their little tokens at the bottom there. So just a little tidbit, kind of a spoiler, I do enjoy the game, or else I wouldn't have really bothered to bling it out. I haven't painted these models yet because I was like, I'm not really sure about this one. It seems kind of light and fluffy. Some of their Barnes & Noble games are kind of hit or miss. Some are really cool, like Blitzball is always great. The other ones I don't really care for. So I was like, I'm not going to paint these up. Let me play the game a little bit first. So I didn't paint those up, but I kind of proxied. Once I started blanking stuff out, I was like, oh, I've got a little two-handed hammer on this guy. I've got your little incanter guy there. You can see the guy in the kind of purple and gold. I've got an adjudicator there. Now this here is a bird that you get, so I don't have any other birds, so I just use a little griffhound there, because the ability of this guy here is he just flies in real quick and does a little hit and flies back. So you could have a dog do that, doesn't have to fly. So anyway, that's kind of a tangent. So let's talk about the game. So as you can see, you've got kind of a main board, and this board is interesting. So instead of tiles, they have these sort of printed boards with these sort of demarked out zones. Let me grab one of the other ones I'm not using right now. So we'll take this one. And so it's one solid board where you have different rooms that you can kind of move to. And then you've got walls here, which are a little bit thicker. And then you can see kind of in the middle here, you've got doorways between rooms, which you can, have closed or have opened. So the setup is pretty easy. So instead of going and like fishing out different tiles, you just go grab a board and orient it how the scenario tells you. Now, I will say, aesthetically, it leaves a little bit to be desired, because the rooms are kind of disjointed, right? They don't really feel like they go together. But I think this is kind of a neat way to do it. But aesthetically, I definitely feel like, it's a little bit sort of Photoshop-y looking. You know what I mean? So this is a clip art of a sewer drain, and this is some room, and this is some, Zinchian floor artifact, and oops, this is like some, generic dungeon room. But it's cool for the setup. I really like that part of it. You just slap 2 or 3 or 1 tile down, and then you just play. The other thing to note about these while we're talking about them is you can see there's a little number in the corner. So we've got the little 4 there. That shows you the amount of figures that are allowed into that room. And there's cool effects where, like, if you can take a bulldozing charge and then like bulldoze somebody out of that room, you've got to do a kind of an upgraded, inspired move to do that. So there are some cool mechanics with this, and there's different size rooms, so you can create choke points and stuff like that. So that's kind of a neat little thing as well. So again, the scenarios will tell you how to set these boards up and so on. The other thing to note here, there's like a little tracker. Now sometimes this is a churn tracker. Sometimes you will be like, doing something, and then you will like have to do some ritual or something to try to move this around to get to a certain point. The scenario will explain how to use that, but like let's say you had 6 turns in the game, so you would start to drop this down every turn or something. But this is just kind of a generic tracker depending on the scenario. It tracks all kinds of stuff. So, and typically you're going to be moving around rooms, fighting monsters, doing little effects. There might be interact abilities that the scenario will tell you if you go to this specific room or something, do an interact action. That's kind of a generic action you can do to either open or close a door. That would cost you an interact action, or there's some other scenario specific thing. And when you play the game, you always have 4 characters in play. And so I've just been soloing the game. I'll talk more about that in the review part, but when I solo, you just play with all 4 characters. If there's 2 players, you pick 2. Luxa, Stormrider, has Taros, that's the bird, and so that's kind of a companion. She has an ability that will activate the abilities on the bird here. And so what happens is, the way the turn works is you will have an adventure phase, and that will be described in the scenario during the adventure phase step. You just do what it says. So you might spawn some monsters or do some other things or move something on this tracker and stuff like that. So you do that first. And then you have the dice phase where you just go and roll up all the dice. Each character has 3 dice, and you've got little spots for it here on the cards. And these are your actions. So you're always going to have 3 actions, so to speak, with each character. And you spend the dice to take those actions. So you do the adventure phase, then the dice phase. And then you do the initiative phase. So you shuffle up the cards for each of the heroes out here and shuffle them up. You'll notice you're not shuffling up any cards for any of the monsters. So you shuffle these up, and then the characters must activate in the order that you drew them out. So in this case, we'd be going in this order, let's say. So then starting in this case with Calthea, they will then take and use all their dice for activations. And so then you take the dice and you can do a move, you can do an attack, you can do special abilities and so on like that. We'll talk about that in a minute. So that's the action phase. So after you do the initiative phase, shuffle the cards and deal them out, then you just do the action phase and you resolve all those. And then you have a leader phase, and that's for the bad guys. And you can see you have little cards like this. So these are the death rattle skeletons. This is their hit points. This is kind of their activation thing. So when they do a reaction, they will first do an attack and then a move and then the special icon, which matches with this rise thing. So they're going to do those in that order. One of those will activate there. And then if you have leaders in play, one of these here, and so the leader has stuff that happens during the leader phase. And so in this case, there's no actual text. Sometimes there's text, but this will just be an activate. So he'll actually do the WOG ability, which is there, and then he'll do an attack. So that always happens at the end of the turn. And there's a recovery phase in case any of your characters might have been knocked out and stuff. And then you just kind of repeat the loop. So let's go to the action phase, the heroes, and see how that's going to work. So what's going to happen, in this case, remember we drew Calthea first, so she can take any of these actions here. So let's zoom in a little bit. So you can spend a die, so to do a move. Okay, so the move says 4+. What that means is to do an inspired move, you have to spend a die 4+. You can spend any dice to just do a standard move. So if I spend that, I can move 2 adjacent spaces. Very easy, 1, 2. If I do an inspired move, then I can do kind of some special action. So let's talk about movement there. So let's just use this figure here. So if we do a regular move, we could go 1, 2, move 2 spaces. If you do an inspired move, in that case, if you spend a 4+, you can move 3 spaces. You go 1, 2, 3. All right. Now the other thing to keep in mind is if you are engaged, and if you are engaged, let's say we're in here, if there's equal to or more figures of the enemies than there are good guys, then you're engaged and you can't move. But if you spend an inspire move, then you can engage. So I can move 2 out of that. But right now I'm engaged, so I can't do a move. The other thing that's worth knowing is if you're engaged, you can't do an interact action. You got to clear them out. Now the other part is, remember I told you about kind of the size of the room. So this is a size 3. So let's say we had 3 skeletons in here like this, like so. So if I do an inspired move, I can do a barge, which means I can knock one of these out of there. Again, you need to do the inspired move, which again for Calthea is a 4+. Other characters might be a 3+ or whatever. So that's how move works. Now interact is very simple. You can just spend a die and do an interact. Now typically that's just opening a door. The doors will usually start closed. The enemy models can move through closed doors all they want, but the good guys have to take an interact action to open that. Now an inspired interact will be scenario specific. And it'll say in the card, again, going back to our example here, she's got a 3+ interact. So if she spends a 3+, she can take advantage of the inspired version of that for whatever they're doing. So there might be like some ritual or something. If you take an inspired, you can do 2 steps instead of 1 step and so on. Now a rest action, you can spend any dice you want, and then you can heal wounds. As you take wounds here, so there's a little slot for wounds. In the old, Silver Tower and the other ones, you actually mark these. You don't ever mark there. You just have a stack of wounds and you can see there's their hit points there. So if you take a rest action, you can heal a wound. If you take an inspired rest, in this case a 6+, you can heal 2 wounds. And it's worth noting that when you take your amount of damage there, you're actually going to flip over to the wounded side there. You can see this is the wounded side. And so everything's kind of changed a little bit and your stats are changed. And so the other thing is if you do an inspired rest here, once you've healed up any wounds you might have collected here, you can take an inspired rest to actually flip back over to the unwounded side. So that's how that rest works. And it's worth noting while we're here, if you get knocked out again, then you're kind of knocked out of the game. And the game is through a campaign, so if you get knocked out completely, you don't lose or anything unless the scenario tells you do. But then this character will come back in the next scenario on their wounded side if they get knocked all the way out. If they're like remain in the game wounded, then they'll come back fully healed. So let's flip this back here. So the next thing you might do is attack. Okay, so if we zoom in just a little tighter there. So we've got a broadsword here. Again, you can use any dice you want to use that. But you will do X damage on the left if it's not inspired. If you spend a die, 5+, you will do the kind of the inspired damage there. So there's a few different things. So here's just a melee. You got to be in the same thing. This is an area attack. Will hit everybody in that zone. And here you have a ranged attack. So you have to be that's an adjacent zone that they can see. And then also it's like this one's actually a ranged area attack, so very powerful there. So again, attacking is pretty easy. It's the same. You spend the die, do the left damage, unless it's inspired to do the right. And then you got special abilities here, which can be inspired and stuff, and all 4 characters have that. And like I said, Luxa has the ability to activate the little bird and so on. But we're leaving out one very, very important point here. Every time the character activates, so let's say we call Thea, she does an activation, then the monsters are immediately going to react after each action she does. So she's going to do an action, monster reacts, an action, monster reacts, action, monster reacts. Okay? And what happens is they will react if there's a monster in line of sight or a leader in line of sight of that character that just acted last there. And then they will react and try to hurt them or somebody else. So if you're out of line of sight, you can kind of play around with the blocking and stuff like that up there to try to work that around. That's one of the puzzles of the game. And so again, when the monster reacts, let's say there was a death rattle skeleton, you know, like in the same room or adjacent room, then it'll run through its activation. So it'll attack, move, and then do this ability, which will summon another skeleton. And also, if there's a leader though, you always will activate that. If there's a leader within line of sight, this will always take precedence and activate. And again, they're usually going to target, if there's a choice, the person that acted last. But if that's not somebody they can like do damage to or something, then they'll just damage, you know, whoever else. But here's the really cool part is, let's say Calthea is gone and then Doraz is next. Okay, well Doraz has a 1. You go, the 1s are no good because you can never use an Inspire thing, but you can do a chain. So Doraz can spend his 1, do some action, and then anybody else, including Doraz, can spend a 2 if there's a 2. Now there's no 2 out here, so we can't really do that yet, but there will be certain instances in the scenarios that will tell you how to get these destiny tokens, and each character can hold up to 1 destiny token. And so for these you can spend and pretend that the dice is a different number. So let's say we did this, we spend a 1, and then Regis had this here, so he could spend that. He says I'm going to make that a 2. So then Regis can react because we're going up, we're going 1, 2, and then Doraz going back 3, and there's no reactions in this. It's called an action chain. The monsters don't get a chance to react, and so you can go from 1 all the way to 6 if you get lucky. So we got 1, 2, 3. We got to find a 4. There's a 4 here, so she could go, and then we got to go to the 5, back to Doraz, and then back to the 6, and then you can go all the way through the chain. You might go 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then whoever acted last at the end of the chain, the monster will react to that person, no matter who it is. Because that was the last character to activate. But you can kind of get a lot of moves in and kind of build up a kind of a little combo, even though your first couple actions with the 1 and the 2 probably won't be doing, you know, a lot of stuff because they're low dice. They'll start that chain out. So that's a really cool thing. And then like I mentioned before, it's a campaign. So you can play these out of order. There's 12 adventures, so you move from one adventure to the next. And the thing that you keep along is you will get rid of destiny tokens, you'll get rid of any wounds, like I mentioned with the wounded thing. If your character gets knocked all the way out, they'll come into the next campaign scenario wounded. You also have the ability here through different things in this scenario. There might be a treasure room, you can draw cards off this treasure deck, and so you get a few different things here. One, you can get armor that is like specific, or weapons specific to a character, so no matter who draws it, they can immediately give it to that character because it's only usable by them. Or you can get kind of generic artifacts that anybody could use, and you can still decide to give it to somebody else. Usually you can get, you know, 1 or 2 treasures out of a scenario possibly. So there's not like a lot of these, but you get to keep these for the next, you know, campaign for as long as you can go. Although there will be effects and stuff when you do get wounded. You have to discard, you know, 1 of your treasures. So if you only have 1, you gotta get rid of that and stuff like that. There's other abilities like that that will come and try to eat your treasures as well. Or sorry, I think I just misspoke. If you're wounded, you don't lose a treasure. If you get taken out of action, you lose a treasure. Yeah, so those will persist, and you can only have like 1 of each type. So there's like an armor, a weapon, and an artifact. You can't, you know, keep more than 1 of each of those 3 types from scenario to scenario. And then that's it. You kind of play through the campaign, try to figure out this little puzzle here with the dice, how the different mobs are going to react and stuff like that, and kind of go back and forth, and then again complete the objective of the scenario and go through all 12. Okay, so that was Warhammer Quest Lost Relics. And if you watch the walkthrough, you can tell I really enjoy this game. I was very surprised how much I enjoyed this game. Let's go through our pillars of reviews real quickly. The game plays 1 to 4 players. I've only played this solo. I don't know that I would play this certainly with 4, because there's just the whole action chain thing, which is the main thing I really like. Having that discussion and that puzzle optimization thing, I think it's going to lend itself to a little too much of the alpha gamer kind of thing, kind of coming in and says, no, you should do that, no, you should do that. And even if you don't really have an alpha gamer kind of, you know, thing happening in your group, that discussion doesn't really interest me, to be honest, because I don't really want to have that. But as a solo game, it's perfect because you roll up your dice, you take a look at the board, you take a look at the initiative the characters have to act in, you take it, there's actually a lot of things to consider here because, okay, let's say I activate this one character and I'm like, okay, I'm going to start this chain, but if I start this chain, I'm going to end the activation on, you know, the Luxa character. Well, maybe Luxa has a ton of wounds, and I'm like, well, if I end on her, then she's going to get wounded or knocked out or something, and that's going to be bad because she's going to get removed and have to come and get, you know, recovered in the recovery phase, and that's going to leave a hole there. So is this action chain really worth it? And, you know, or do I set this up because they know this, if I set this up right, this action chain is going to really decimate the enemy, and I'll be, you know, on my way to victory. So that way that you chain all of those actions across all of the characters, they work so in unison in a way, and it feels like it's cool because it's like almost like teamwork within this little squad, this little company of heroes here. It's just, that vibe of it's really cool. And I think I might start to struggle with it, you know, once we added, you know, 2 or 3 other players. I would probably be like into playing it 2-player and stuff like that. But to me, it's a puzzle. And the puzzles kind of lend themselves to solo ability, right? Anything that's puzzly is very kind of solitaire, just by its nature. Now, I will say the game is not super complicated or anything, although sometimes you can have some, you know, real, you know, kind of decisions that you're going to really kind of scratch your head about in terms of all those chains. But the core mechanics are not complicated. So I think this would be a great like family game to play with, you know, a parent and some kids, or just some kids by themselves. Yeah, I think it would really work for that as well, because it's not super complicated. There's not like a ton of rules or anything. So that's the player count part. Play time, what's this box say? 30 minutes, yeah, because most of these scenarios are over pretty quickly. Especially, I've replayed some of them just to kind of, you know, get the feel for them. Some of the first couple are pretty quick. You can get them done in like 15, 20 minutes, you know, no problem. So yeah, playtime it's quick. So you got 12, you know, scenarios. So if you played them all back to back, that would be like 6-7 hours of gameplay. And I do see this as being replayable to a certain degree, for sure. I mean, I'm going to hang on to it because it's just a lot of fun. I've really always wanted, and I'll kind of move into my last pillar of review here, like what is this game like? I've always wanted kind of a dungeon crawly, quick solo game. I mean, I've played, you know, the original Warhammer quests from 1995, the new Warhammer quests, Blackstone Fortress even solo. I played the whole campaign solo on that one, and I played that whole campaign of Blackstone Fortress with, you know, a couple of friends of mine too. I played through that a couple of times now, and those games are really fun solo, like they are. The original Warhammer quest and the Blackstone Fortress and Silver Tower I've played through solo. Shadows over Hammerhall doesn't really work solo, and I like those for that. It's kind of this big, epic, sweeping experience. But in the same way that if you kind of look at something like Pandemic Legacy, so let me just take a quick tangent here. So Pandemic Legacy Season 1, I played that solo. Pandemic Legacy Season 2, I played that with a friend of mine. And that was much more enjoyable to play with a friend because there's a fair amount going on in that game. So it's nice to have somebody to kind of bounce ideas off of. You will have kind of the tendency to not play something wrong, which you might, when you're playing a big game solo, you might just miss a thing. If you're controlling, you know, lots of characters, you might say, oh, I should have rolled for their initiative or some other thing, you know, because there's a lot kind of to juggle. And the same with kind of the Warhammer quests, where, you know, playing through all of Blackstone Fortress especially, you start to compile a lot of cards and abilities and equipment and stuff. So there's a lot that you can kind of miss because you're juggling 4 characters. But it's still really fun solo, and it's just a different experience. Whereas this one is a nice kind of bite-sized thing. So if I were to go back to the Pandemic Legacy thing, those are great solo or with a group. But with something like Forbidden Island, which is another Matt Leacock game who designed Pandemic, which is a small game, it's a family game. It has a very pandemic kind of mechanism with the cards, although instead of diseases, it's a sinking island and stuff, and you're looking for treasure. But that was the one that was great. I used to play it with my youngest son all the time, and also with some other family members too, but he and I really like to play it together. And that was also when I really liked to play solo. Like after the kids went to bed, I would break that out and play it for like a half an hour. And it was this cool little puzzle. And so I've always kind of wanted there to be kind of a fantasy dungeon crawl thing that could somehow be that Forbidden Island thing, where it was like a quick little break it out, play, you know, for half an hour, play a couple games back to back. And it's a nice puzzle, it's fun, you know, has some things to chew on, but it's not like an overbearing, you know, strategy game that I would want to play starting in the afternoon. It's something I could play at after 9 o'clock at night and still be, you know, cogent enough to deal with the game. This is that game. This is that perfect little pack away game. You could probably take this like on a vacation or something if you're like, I need a board game to take, you know, because I want to play little board games. And this is a cool little thing here. Yeah. So I think production wise, I just want to mention, because I was talking to a buddy of mine. He's like, I hate those boards. And I says, I know what you're saying because it looks weird on the table. But in practice, it's really cool. Like there's actually some interesting maps, you know, that the different scenarios have. And there's some interesting bottlenecks and all that stuff, and little rooms and big rooms and stuff. And it's really a cool, like, I mean, it's just a cool little system there. And so just that part of the system, the whole chain, the action chain, and the reactions of the monsters, like the monsters don't really have a turn. They have the leader phase where the leader will activate something, but there's not really like a big monster turn. It's just, they're always, you know, back and forth with you. And that keeps it really, really cool. And it keeps you engaged in terms of like, if I do this, they're going to react. So just that sort of immediate sort of reaction keeps you invested in sort of the, again, the puzzle of it. And now again, you know, some people might gnash their teeth at like, you know, probably can't even see this, but the little tokens for the minions. Now they're trying to keep this like an affordable game that can go on the shelf at Barnes & Noble. So you get a few models for the heroes, and then you get the little tokens here. And that's how I played with it until this last game of it. And it's fine. And the interesting thing is like the base size here. So if we take a look at the, you know, this figure, which you can't see, the size of the tokens are the size of the bases here. And one thing is, I didn't really get into the damage of how it works, but when you damage a model, unless you kill it outright, if you just do some damage, you actually flip the token over to kind of a damage side. So you can still use that with the models. You can just kind of tuck that under their base there to show that they were damaged, because you can't flip a model over necessarily. So there's that little mechanic there. So I can see why they use tokens mechanically as well. But it's cool if you have some Underworld stuff. Like, it's really cool. I'm just super excited. I'm like, oh, I have models for everything in here. Yeah, I can't recommend this enough. It's just, it's not going to, like, you know, it's not earth shattering or anything, but it is kind of in a way, because it's, like I said, it's this nice, easy to get into, but very satisfying, puzzly type of thing that you can break out in half an hour. And I could see, you know, my kids are all grown now, but if I could see if they were still around in the house, that this would be a fun thing we could break out. And it wouldn't be so overwhelming. It wouldn't tax them in such a way that they were like, oh gosh, this game's gonna take an hour and a half, you know, to play a Warhammer Quest game, you know. But this is something you can knock out in a half an hour. So, and it's got that puzzle part that is just really, really cool. So definitely take a look at this Lost Relics game. I think, you know, I think a lot of people are going to like it. You know, some people might dismiss it, you know, based on the look of the boards and based on kind of the size of it. But it's really cool. And I'd like to see this mechanic of this chain and stuff, and how the monster reaction kind of bubble up into maybe a larger, you know, more traditional Warhammer Quest game. And it's really interesting what they've done here with this mechanic, which started in Silver Tower and carried all the way through Blackstone Fortress and Curse City. You know, that's this little, they've been kind of like wrinkling with it a little bit over the iterations here. So it's cool to see them, you know, keep iterating on that. So anyway, take a look. Thanks.